Hey everyone, so I just wanted to cover the horticulture topic at this point of medicinal crops. So, excuse me, when we're looking at medicinal plants and herbs, we're talking about those that are used for medical applications, sometimes long-term or short-term medical applications, depending on what type of treatment we're looking at. When we say herb, it refers to any part of the plant. So we could mean the fruit, seed, stem, flower, leaf, stigma, root, basically whichever part we're taking from the plant to try and make this medicine from, that's the part that we're concentrating on. When we think about the applications of medicinal plants and herbs, they can help supplement high populations with a low supply of drugs. So again, if we're thinking of places where it's really heavily populated, but there's a low supply of synthetic drugs, these medicinal plants and herbs kind of help make up for that gap. So this is especially seen in the developing world. We tend to think of these as traditional medicines too, so that's part of the reason why they're still extensively used in those parts of the world as well. They can be used as a replacement for drugs that diseases have developed resistances to. So again, if we're thinking about something maybe that has an antibacterial application, a synthetic drug that has that, eventually some bacteria may become resistant to it over time. If you end up treating it with something that's similar but a little bit different, like an herbal remedy, that can sometimes help kind of be a different stimulus that will end up working better than the synthetic version, just depending on the situation. So let me move my recording down here. How long have we been using plants for medicine? So based on actual human records, we get an indication that it goes as far back as ancient Sumer. So if we're talking about very early first human civilizations, but chances are we've probably used them for even longer. If we look at our closest genetic ancestors, chimpanzees and bonobos, they will eat certain plants to get medicinal properties for them. It seems that they when they're exhibiting certain symptoms, they know which plants to go for to help remedy that. So chances are that medicine's been with us since we were kind of a little bit more primitive than civilization. So why do plants have these properties? We think it's great for us, but why would a plant have them in the first place? So most phytochemicals, and phyto, the first part of that word there just means plant. So when we say phytochemicals, we mean plant chemicals, help plants defend against herbivores because they're bitter tasting. So again, if you're an animal that can only eat plants, there are a lot of plants that you may not eat constantly because of how bitter they taste. The four major phytochemicals that are used in medicine are alkaloids, glycosides, polyphenols, and terpenes, which we'll start looking at here in a little bit more detail. And then again, if you're looking at this presentation here on Classroom, this video clip from TED Ed about the amazing ways plants defend themselves is worth a look. This just kind of gives a general overview of how plants defend themselves against herbivores, with these chemicals being a large chunk of it. Let me move my recording here again. So the first group we'll look at here are alkaloids. Alkaloids are very bitter tasting, and they are toxic. So again, even though we use these as medicine in really high doses, they could be lethal depending on who is consuming them. The medical treatments that alkaloids help with include things like malaria, asthma, cancer. They provide pain relief, and they can help treat against bacteria. A lot of them have psychotropic or stimulant properties. So this is part of the reason why a lot of these are highly regulated, depending, and it'll maybe be a little bit more clear when we're looking at the list. But of course, we're looking here at a poppy, known for being associated with opium, again, a controlled substance that's illegal in a lot of cases to have. So this is something that kind of comes under a lot of scrutiny in the medical field. So some examples of the alkaloids that are beneficial would include things like, and I apologize in advance in this video because I feel like I'm going to mispronounce a lot of things, but I will try my best. So some examples include quinine, which you can get from cinchona plants, ephedrine, which you get from ephedra or the mahuang plant, morphine, which is found from the opium poppy. Again, morphine obviously has a strict medical application, and that is where it's derived from, is the opium poppy. Cocaine, which is derived from the cocoa plant, which is different from cacao, where chocolate comes from, just as a clarification. Caffeine, which comes from the coffee plant. Theobromine, which comes from cacao, again, when we're talking about chocolate and things like that, as well as tea. And nicotine, which we can get from tobacco or milkweed. Then if we look at glycosides, so here we can see the chemical structure of a glycoside here. they have activated effects when the chemical bond is broken in this molecule. So again, it's a fairly complex molecule, but when that chemical bond is broken, there are certain medicinal properties that we see. So some of the treatments include things like laxatives, cardiac applications, so again, things related to heart health, pain relief, and inflammation. So the prime example that we think of in this case is salicylin. So salicylin is derived from willow bark, and it's the same component that we think of as being akin to aspirin, basically. Aspirin is the synthetic version of the drug. Salicylin would be kind of the naturally derived form of it. Polyphenols are another group. Let me go ahead and move myself again here. So polyphenols have pretty specific applications. This group, we're mostly looking at phytoestrogens. Again, phyto meaning plant, and estrogen we're referring to hormones that are related to, again, when we're thinking of human beings, female members of female sex. So these have a hormone mimicking ability. They mimic estrogen that's present in our body. And tannins. Polyphenols also include tannins, which have a very bitter taste to them. So the medicinal treatments, again, are kind of related to their hormone mimicking properties. So things like fertility issues, menstruation, menopausal issues, that's basically the application of polyphenols. So if we're looking at examples, we're talking about things like tannic acid, which you can get from tara, Chinese sumac, Aleppo oak, and Sicilian sumac. All of these have a high concentration of these polyphenol groups. And then finally, we have terpenes here. And again, you can see some of the plants that these come from. Terpenes are very aromatic. They're often found in conifers. So if we're thinking of like evergreen trees, that's a source that you'll regularly find terpenes in. The medicinal treatments include infections, getting rid of bacterial or fungal infections, and use as essential oils and aromatherapy. If you've ever heard of people using aromatherapy to help clear up respiratory passages and things like that, terpenes would be a good example of that. So we talk about some of the example terpenes, would include thymol from thyme, like we're seeing up here, and then vitamin A compounds such as retinol, retinal, retinoic acid, and beta-carotene. And of course, when we're talking about these vitamin A compounds, especially beta-carotene, we start to think carrots automatically, a lot of orange foods, but there's higher concentrations beyond carrots in palm. And again, we're looking here at a type of palm with palm fruit concentrated in the center. Cantaloupe, mango, pumpkin, papaya, sweet potato, and spinach are all also very high in these terpenes. So now, when we talk a little bit about the cultivation of these plants, getting them into full maturity, because medicinal plant sources are so varied, their methods of cultivation are varied too. There's no just one way to take care of these things. We've seen a lot of flowering plants, a lot of hardwoods, so there's a lot of different things that you have to keep in mind to grow them. One of the important pieces here is talking about crop rotation to minimize issues with pests and plant diseases. Crop rotation is when you grow different crops in the same soil depending on the season. Basically, you're changing up what types of plants grow in each one. So to look a little bit here at the applications of crop rotation, this is looking at tobacco growth in soil in different conditions, basically, as far as which plants grew before. The top one is tobacco after 3 years of just tobacco. So again, the nutrients that tobacco needs are all dried up. So we've got these little wimpy tobacco plants. Tobacco after 3 years of corn looks pretty good. Again, corn and tobacco are kind of going for different nutrients, so they aren't competing as much. And same thing here for tobacco after 3 years of soybeans. They have a better chance to grow in that environment. So once you've grown those plants, you have to think about the preparation for them. Most medicinal plants are very tough and fibrous, so that's why we have to apply them. We don't want people to have to chew on these really nasty plants. Liquid extracts come from boiling the plant material in water, getting it down to a liquid state. Tablets are formed from a powder made from crushed dry plants. So again, you can kind of think of tablets and pills having this sort of powdery residue to them that you're absorbing. Tinctures will come from soaking the plant material in an ethyl alcohol agent, either cold wine or a distilled spirit, to get those substances to separate. And then pure chemicals can also be extracted from plants or synthesized, again, if we're making an artificial drug. So, let me drop here for the question. What's better then, herbal or synthetic medicine? Kind of a complex question. So before the 2000s, plants were rarely scientifically studied for their medicinal effect. and many still remain untested. There's a lot of things that we could still learn on that front. There are many recorded cases each year of people dying from synthetic drugs, but cases of death from medicinal herbs are rare. So what's the reason for the difference here? There's two schools of thought for it. You could look at that statistic and just say, well, synthetic drugs are less safe. The medicinal herbs are more safe. But really, a lot of it comes from the amount of synthetic drug use that we have in the world versus medicinal herb use. Because there are so many more synthetic drugs that are used day to day, there's a higher chance that people could die from them as opposed to medicinal herbs. So don't just take it at face value that there's a difference there. So I have here a quote from Dr. Siddhi Veerasham from 2012 that says, despite the current preoccupation with synthetic chemistry, again, making a synthetic drug, a drug made by a person, as a vehicle to discover and manufacture drugs, the contribution of plants to disease treatment and prevention is still enormous. Even at the dawn of the 21st century, 11% of the 252 drugs considered as basic and essential by the WHO or World Health Organization were exclusively of flowering plant origin. So again, plants have a really significant contribution in medicine. One part that you might want to think about with herbal remedies, they may not have listed regulation before side effects or interactions are known. So some of them are available on the market before we can look at all of the side effects for them. And then my last point here is just to kind of give an example with one specific treatment. So St. John's wort. St. John's wort has been clinically proven to be as effective as certain antidepressants for that application. The side effects of St. John's wort were also shown to not be significantly better or worse than those of the same antidepressants. Again, about an equal field. So you might think, well, why shouldn't I just take both? If I'm depressed, why don't I take an antidepressant as well as St. John's wort? However, when we talk about unregulated use of St. John's wort as a supplement in addition to prescribed medication, it can result of the effect of both substances not working or an overabundance of serotonin. So it could cause it to not work at all, and you just get the depression that sets in, or the overabundance of serotonin could cause any one of these symptoms. Agitation, confusion, rapid heart rate, dilated pupils, muscle issues, heavy sweating, diarrhea, headache, shivering, goosebumps, high fever, seizures, irregular heartbeat, and unconsciousness. So again, don't just use over-the-counter stuff without consulting with your doctor first about any medications you are already taking to see whether or not they will interact with one another. Normally, your doctor is going to be the person who understands this best, so don't just self-diagnose. So I hope that this helped clear up a few pieces about herbs being used in a medicinal capacity.